Posey Gloves here, and today we're going to be talking about standing waves and how they can influence your listening. You see, this is just some general acoustic knowledge for when you're practicing your listening. In reality, there are so much more acoustic-wise that we could go over, but this isn't a course on acoustics. This is a course on listening. So when you're listening, if you're listening over your monitors, you're going to be introducing a space into your listening environment, right? And if you're listening and if you take it to different places like your car or your buddy's system or wherever it is, it's going to sound different over each system, and you want to know why that is. So today we're going to be looking at one aspect of that. We're not going to go too crazy in detail, but the first thing we're going to do is let's take a look at your room. Now, if you look around your room and you say count up the parallel surfaces. So I have now in pairs. So I have a wall there and a wall there. That's parallel. So that's one. I have a wall there and a wall there. That's two. And I have a floor and a ceiling. So that's three. So I have three sets of parallel surfaces that I have to deal with in my room. And the problem with parallel surfaces is as sound expands, and you should know about this stuff from the Sound and Synth Basic course. This can get quite a bit more advanced if I were to do like a whole separate course for acoustics one day, perhaps, but not today. So as sound expands, it comes out as sort of like a bubble. I sort of make it, I imagine it's sort of this holographic bubble. But anyways, there's a whole bunch of waves happening, right? And it moves in all directions around me. And without getting into the details of angled sound and corner reflections and all other sorts of madness, when you have two parallel surfaces, they will reflect. When the sound reflects off of them, there will be a frequency that fits the exact length your walls are apart. So the actual wavelength, the time it takes for it to compress and refract, will happen to match the length of your room. And so we're going to use Citrus here to visualize this. So I have a sine wave here. Now granted, this is not how sound looks in the real world, but we are just sort of going really simple right now. So we have a parallel surface, right? Let's pretend that this is a wall, and let's pretend that this is a wall. And then we have this wave that fits directly in the middle. Well, what happens is you get what's called a standing wave. And this can happen between any sets of parallel surfaces, and there's actually other circumstances that can cause this as well. Sometimes they're a little mystical because the reasons they're caused are kind of advanced. But the biggest one is these parallel surfaces deals. So what you have here is you have this frequency, and it's going to literally sit and build up. So normally it would like bounce around your room and it's no big deal. It'll lose energy as it bounces. But this guy is like reinforcing itself on every bounce. So it forms this standing wave. It's not going anywhere. It just sits there and gains and gains. Now it does go away because it is losing energy as it bounces. It's not like a feedback loop that like goes up. It still loses energy. It just loses it a lot slower. And the perceived gain of this frequency and all the multiples of this frequency are going to be louder than the other frequency. So some people will call, now this is part of tuning your room, but generally you just build a room that avoids standing waves. The number one way to do it is to simply add diffusion to your room. So if you add diffusion to your room, what that means is you put up a bunch of things. I don't have one on me right now, but basically you put up what's called the diffuser. And a diffuser, what it does is it is a thing that diffuses sound. So when sound hits it, you have a bunch of uneven surfaces, and there's actually a whole bunch of sequences, and there's different types of, there's like polycylindrical diffusers, and there's like cloud diffusers, which are basically squares that come off at different lengths. And so it helps prevent standing waves because it'll cause the sound to bounce off in different directions. It diffuses the sound. The other option you have is absorbers. So you get these like pieces of foam, like so, and there's different kinds that you can get. There's like rock wool is one of the best. So if you can, just go for rock wool. It's pretty trusty. And now where you put these things in your room, I'm not going to be covering in this series at least, because I'm just making you aware of some issues that you may or may not be aware of. And so what you do is you put these things up in your room, and you put them, they got to be in the right spots. If you put them in the wrong spots, it won't matter. But this basically would act as an absorber. So if I were to talk into this, you see that it absorbs. I'm not sure how well you can hear me through that thing, but anyways, that will absorb a lot of the high frequencies, and it even gets into some of the mid-range stuff. So this is pretty good. But the issue with diffusers, so diffusers will diffuse sound, so essentially you don't get a standing wave. Absorbers will absorb the sound. Now, the thickness of the absorber will pretty much determine how low of a frequency it can absorb. So this thing, it's reasonable, it's okay, and it can absorb high and even some of the high mids. but then if my frequency, which it's almost always a low frequency, were to be playing, if that was the frequency I'm having a problem with, well, then this isn't going to do anything. So the number one way is you simply build walls that aren't parallel. And even that won't always fix your issues. There's all sorts of more advanced things. I know I keep saying that, but it just is. The topics are complicated topics. So you want to be aware of that. And so what you do is you put up absorbers and you treat your room. Now, the absorber thing, the length of your absorber, there's actually an equation, or a diffuser, I mean. If you were to put a diffuser up with all these different lengths out, the length of the diffuser coming off the wall, and of course placement, there's a whole bunch of other mumbo jumbo that goes into this, but that will determine the lowest frequency it can diffuse. I think it's something like 14 feet will diffuse down to like 20 hertz. I can't remember, but it's a pretty long distance. Most of it's not very reasonable for a lot of you guys. So you want to be aware of this, that there are these issues in a room. There are other issues, but that's like your big one. The other one that you need to be aware of is where you put your setup in your room. If you're in a corner, consider this. So let's say that this is the corner of your room, right here, this triangle, and you put yourself right here. Well, you have these things, angles of incidence and reflection that you're going to have to be dealing with on how sound bounces off. If you are, let's say you're sitting right here. This is like so, I hope you can imagine this. So you're sitting in the corner of your room, like you got it set up like this. I used to have it set up like this, but I had diffusion set up in a way that helped me quite a bit. Actually, I quite like the way it sounded. But basically what happens is you get these reflections. Now, the reflections that sound the loudest are the first order reflections. You'd be surprised on how loud they sound. So if you have your speaker sitting on a desk or something like I do, and I have to be aware of this, when my speakers are playing, it's going to reflect off my desk. And some of the sound's going to transmit through it, like the low frequencies. So I'm going to hear less lows, and I'm going to hear substantially more highs and mids to an extent because of what's on my desk. So if I put absorbers, so you can't see it, but here's like my speaker, and then like here's my desk. If I put an absorber right here, the sound would bounce and come off and hit me. If I put an absorber here, that would greatly reduce that reflection and create a more accurate listening environment. Now, I'm not even going to delve into stereo images right now, but this kind of deals with stereo images as well. So if I'm sitting in a room and I'm like sitting right here, the reflection coming off of this speaker, so remember, sound emits in 360 directions. So I'll have a reflection coming off, hitting this wall, and then hitting me, and another one hitting me. Now, sound will bounce off at an angle of incidence, meaning it will match the angle it hit it at. It behaves the same way light does. So as it hits, so it'll hit like, if it hits at 45 degrees, it's going to bounce off at 45 degrees, basically. It's going to bounce off at the same angle. So if you're dealing with vaulted ceilings, so if you have like a ceiling that goes like that or whatever, the angle, if you hit it like this, it's going to come off and it's going to go like that. It's not going to do this. Like it's not, if it was an angle like that, it's going to go, I don't know. I don't know if this is helping very much. But basically, if you get my picture, there's a pattern to the way these angles move. It behaves the same way that light does. So a lot of people will use mirrors to tell where they should put their absorbers. Because what the trick is you set up your speakers and you try and put it in the middle of your room. If you set it up in the corner, you're going to have to put absorption in unequal ways on your room. Because depending on where you put your absorbers, it will impact the way those reflections hit you. Now, those reflections are pretty darn loud. That's one thing that a lot of people don't get, is how loud these reflections can be. Another thing you need to be aware of is, well, never mind. We're not going to talk about that. So basically, when you set up your room, you want to be in the middle of your room, or you at least want to be symmetrical, and then you treat the room. You can have a room with no parallel surfaces that is symmetrical. It sounds weird, but it's totally doable. It's actually not that weird. You can make like a Superman shaped room, and you would have some pretty cool, some interesting acoustics. It also affects the first order reflections, the number of reflections you get. And we could get into like reverb plugins and all sorts of things. But the ones you want to be concerned with, the reflections you want to dim the most, are the ones that are hitting surfaces that are the closest to you. So, or the first order reflections. So I want to be concerned with like my desk a lot, but I always have so much stuff underneath my speakers that it sort of acts as a diffuser for me. I'm also aware that it's mostly highs and mids. So I could put some of these guys down. Another thing you want to be aware of is not sympathetic resonance. I'm not sure what the official term is for this, but basically you want to decouple your speakers from your desk. And I've built a series of little absorber pads that are sort of like this. that serve to separate my speakers from my desk so that when my speakers are vibrating at low frequencies, it does not cause my desk to vibrate at low frequencies. If I have that issue, my desk is going to augment the way I'm hearing things. So these are all just, if you've never heard of these issues, these are all issues you should be aware of and do. You should look at into ways of fixing them. You should look at absorbers, how to place absorbers, where absorbers go. I have sort of this bookcase deal back here and that serves as quite a nice absorber actually. And I could make it more effective probably by just the way I organize stuff I already have. But if I was to go like get really serious, I would go out and buy like wood and rock wool because it's cheaper to just build the stuff than it is to buy the stuff. Pretty much always it's like that. And I would actually build some absorbers and diffusers. I'm actually in a class for acoustics right now. We're going over all these equations and angles and concepts, and it's really, really cool. But the main focus of the class is just like basically why when you put a mic somewhere, it sounds the way it does. And so you just need to be aware of this so that when you're listening to something in an environment, you say, oh, it will probably suffer from these types of reflections. We're going to have buildup because there's this many surfaces over there. Like every surface, like a corner surface will contribute, I believe it's 3 dB per surface. So if you're sitting in a corner, you're going to be suffering from, like if you're actually in the corner and your system is like over here and the sound's going this way, so it's going boom, that direction, you're actually going to be suffering from a really augmented experience because you have all those surfaces right there. And the way they add the frequencies together is not going to be even. We say 3 dB like it's a nice thing, but it's not. The other thing that's weird is that decibels are a logarithmic scale, something I haven't talked about too much on my channel. And if you were to add, for example, if you were to add like 90 decibels and 90 decibels, you would get 93 decibels. You would not get 180 decibels. You would get 93 because it's weird. It adds 3 dB for every time you double it, which is really weird for someone who is not familiar with the decibel system, how it works, the fact that it's, a logarithmic system, not a linear system, and it's better to approximate loudness. We could get into all sorts of other units too, but basically the main takeaway is just be aware of your space, be aware of the issues, be willing to get something. If you want a book, a really good book to look at, I have it right here. Is this guy's called The Master Handbook of Acoustics by F. Alton Everest and Kenzie Pullman. And it's a really good book. 6th edition is the one I have. Awesome stuff. You will have so much information in there. You'll be information overload. So if you have any more questions about this, you can ask. I recommend just doing some research and finding out for yourselves about this kind of thing. One day I'll probably do it, but I'm looking more at at mixing courses and rhythm and music theory courses rather than acoustic setup and miking courses, just because those videos kind of require a lot more editing and time and it's just more complicated. But hopefully this has been informative to you. You've gained something of value to you. If you have any questions, let me know. Subscribe and have a blessed day.